Just on this point, kind of just taking the question just a little further, is that, okay, so if consistency determination is brought before the council and it's made, but then something happens, either with a state project or at the local level, who is it that, is it the council through whatever enforcement action they could take? Would they go after the local entity? Or at the, yeah, is that what happens?
Yeah, I mean, so they're going to file a certificate,
right,
with the council, and then
and something's inconsistent, whatever that is. I don't even
right, and there's a statute of limitations on the filing of an appeal on that, so it's going to happen relatively quick. Right. And then the council's out of the picture.
Okay, so you're out of the picture. Yeah. But so then what happens though if you know, in the implementation, something is done that's inconsistent with that certification? So then
the council's jurisdiction is over an appeal of the certification, and it's clear in the statute that it's limited to time periods. It's not that the council has existing continuing jurisdiction to monitor compliance with the projects, and I think that's some of the points that we're hearing from some of the stakeholders. But from a public policy standpoint, I think what Phil was alluding to is, you know, what is the benefit that the council gets out of a certification like this? It's kind of like when we ask proponents to certify that their significant projects, their covered actions, also include adaptive management components that have, you know, future funding identified. They're components that are going to happen in the future, but you want to make sure that when the project's brought before the council, that project has built into it, you know, success, and to the extent that it can have that built into it. So this is one of those ways.
And I want to add, Vice Chair Fiorini actually brought up the point, the council will be reviewing the plan in the future, and as we apply the principles of adaptive management, one of the things we'll want to do is follow up. Okay, have people been following through on the commitments they made in their certifications, and use that information as we move ahead and 3 years or 5 years from now and update the Delta plan. That will help future councils make good decisions.
Okay. Anyone else like to talk to us on this issue? Tom. Mr. Zuckerman is going to fill out a blue form after he goes back to his seat. Okay. Mr. Zuckerman.
I told her I wasn't going to speak on
Pull that down a little bit, please.
Don Natoli just raised a question that sort of the light bulb went on with me. I don't understand the procedure that you're talking about here. I understand the certification procedure and the appeal, but something happens 3 or 4 years into the future. How does it ever get back to the council?
I think that's what we were trying to address, is that, you know, the council has, obviously it has a monitoring function because it has to adaptively manage its plan, but whether or not it has an enforcement jurisdiction regulatory authority, that ends after the appeals process runs.
So you're really dealing with something that is of no consequence to you, because
I think it isn't. The chair will address it. I don't think it's of no consequence.
No, look, this is just like any other public process. Tom Zuckerman will appear before generations of the Delta Stewardship Council to come, pointing out that promises made in water export issues or contracts are not being kept, and demand a redress of grievance, as is your constitutional right. And future councils will try to figure out how to deal with that. But, Tom, the statute didn't give us authority over everyone. As a matter of fact, the National Academy suggested that the lack of clear authority in California water and environmental law is one of the fundamental problems of the situation.
But you're inviting people to come here sometime off in the future and point out that the applicant's certification is no longer true.
Yeah.
And what do? What is the jurisdictional peg that you have at that point to do anything about it?
Well, the council's given the statutory authority, if it wishes to use it, to sue or be sued. Now, whether the council would do that or not in a particular case, but I would predict to you in the first 10 years, there will undoubtedly be complaints that agencies have deliberately failed to seek certification of what is in fact a covered action. I am almost certain that somebody will think up 1,000 reasons of why things they don't like that, to my view, would not even be concluded within this, ought to be a covered action, will show up. And the statute gives the executive director discretionary authority to dismiss the appeal if there is no basis for the appeal. That's not quite a right statement of law, but it's close to what's in the statute. And we're going to move through those issues, but it's impossible to know in advance how to answer the question you've just asked.
You know, I think you might be creating a problem for yourselves that you don't need to deal with. I mean, I can see Joe or his successor writing a letter back to the permitting agency and saying it appears to us that, you know, there's a violation of this thing, do something about it. But I can't really see you developing a staff of 100 enforcement people to go out and try to 5, 6, 10, 20 years after the fact trying to point out that somebody is no longer in compliance with their certificate.
Where are we proposing to have a staff of 100 enforcement people? I missed that.
I thought the Central Delta Water Agency was going to fund us so that we could do that.
No, but if you're talking about enforcing these certifications indefinitely into the future, you're taking on a rather large burden that really applies with the agency that gave the permit in the first place. So
your position is the council should simply ask people to say they're going to do what they do, but have no concern if they fail to do it.
Well, at the first instance, I think you do have some control over that because, you know, you're issuing your opinion as to whether they're in compliance with their certificate. But if you're going to take on the burden of reviewing those things annually or triannually or whatever it is off into the future, it's going to be a big burden for you.
Again, I don't see anything in the Delta plan that says that. Maybe I missed it. We're going to review annually every single certificate.
Pointing out a conundrum here where he's not saying it, he's saying that's a possibility, and the impression we've given is that we might do that. I think the way the statute's written, if I recall correctly, just because it seemed odd to me at the time, but that's what people wanted, which is, ultimately the whole point is these things don't go banging back and forth between us and the proponent. If someone can go to court and say it's inconsistent. So my guess is people would use that in the arsenal of things they would go to court over a project on. But I do think we should put a pin in this to talk about it. I'm okay with us waiting and then doing spot audits as opposed to having a big enforcement and then suggesting what it ought to be, and if we need more legislative authority, asking for it later. But I think Tom's right to point out that there's this big missing piece there that I'm not sure we absolutely have to resolve now, but we have to put it on the list of things that we ought to be thinking about.
Randy.
Tom, I agree with your concern. I think there are two levels of scrutiny after the consistency certification is granted, and that is one, the permitting agency. Just in the case of a county building department is going to monitor things to make sure that there's follow through. In addition, anything that is a covered action is going to be significant in size. And it will have its critics, it will have its proponents, and it will have many observers. And I am certain that there's going to be a lot of people watching and looking for things to go wrong and reporting to either the council or the permitting agency or agencies about shortcomings in their view. I don't think it's going to require Stewardship Council staff to monitor these things. I think we'll have a volunteer army out there keeping an eye on things.
Joe.
I just want to add, it's not about enforcement, I don't think. It's about making sure that people understand what they should be doing and pointing out their responsibility. As a director in the Schwarzenegger administration during the budget crisis, one of the things they required was that the director personally sign verification of the critical nature of purchases for a time during the budget crisis. There was no enforcement mechanism other than you couldn't purchase things if you didn't sign it. And certainly directors could lie if they chose to. But the fact that I was signing something that said this meets this standard was important to me and important to, I think, my staff. And I think the same kind of thing applies here. If agencies are saying this complies with the law and will comply, we intend to comply with the law in the future, I think that there is a certain benefit for that, irrespective of all the enforcement in the world, which I tend to agree is not the point.
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Hank.
Again, I apologize I wasn't here yesterday. Couldn't be here if this was discussed yesterday. But from a procedural standpoint, if we could take a specific instance, Randy wants to build a hotel in Marina in the Delta. And we know that he has to get certification from 14 different agencies. And he comes to us and he gets certification from 10. What do we do with that? What's the process?
Should I walk through that? And Dan is a planner here, but fundamentally assume that it's in Sacramento County because we have a supervisor here.
Okay, assumed.
He actually...
Marinas, that's good. Just go to Don.
Yeah, no. There's a fairly involved process of getting permits that you'll have to do through the county. And if it's covered action, and given the size of the hotel, assume that it's big enough that it's
all those things.
All of those things.
10 out of 14 agency certifications.
Then Sacramento will, when they certify consistency with the Delta plan, need to certify that the marina and hotel meet the requirements of the Delta plan, and they have to do a detailed list of findings. Maybe it takes a few pages to do that, and they will have to do an EIR. When they approve this, and our assumption is at the same time as they do the EIR, when they do their notice of determination, they will also file this certificate of consistency. The way this policy reads, if you choose option 2, they would have to certify that the project is in compliance with all the laws that they have control over, and they would have to obtain from you, as the developer,
From Randy.
A written guarantee of some sort that the project is in compliance with the law. And then, besides the county, the project proponent's going to have to get permits from the Corps of Engineers, so that's federal, probably have to get permits from the Department of Fish and Game, probably going to have to get approvals from any number of agencies before they can move in. And assuming all of that, that's it. They have to certify.
But he doesn't have all of them. Okay.
He doesn't have to have all of them when they file their consistency determination. He has to have enough for the county to say, we're certifying that we're in compliance, and we have this written guarantee from the project proponent.
So it's the county then who, if they find out later on he lacked 2 or 3 specific certification, it's the county's job, not this council's job, to follow up on that.
Yes, or maybe it may even be the Corps of Engineers.
I think a couple points would be worth making. One would be that the state regulatory actions on the permit, say, use the marina as example. You get the conditional use permit from the county, then you got to get a permit from the regional board maybe, and you got to get a permit from Fish and Game. Those state regulatory actions don't trigger the covered action process.
No, they don't.
And so the certification would probably happen just one time. It's pretty efficient then for the applicant at the county level. And if there were state funds involved, or then the funding agency, maybe for some reason he's getting some economic development money or something, then they would do a subsequent certification, I suppose. And that would be the time at which it would occur.
So from Randy's standpoint, he basically goes to Don. Don gives him the certification, and that's it?
That's what I would expect would be the typical pattern.
And the checks and balances would be, I guess, if you get the consistency finding here, that they wouldn't be able to pull permits, building permits, to actually construct anyway, until they admit that checklist. If they only had 10 or 14 when they got here for consistency certification, that clears that hurdle, but they still got those other 4 if they were required as part of that permit approval.
And we would make the determination that they needed 4 more?
No, we don't make that determination.
Sacramento would?
Sacramento would. The county continues to have
And
that
all we
responsibility.
would do is monitor it.
And if there was a violation, that was your second question, if there was a violation of somebody else's regulatory responsibility, a permit, it'd be that agency's responsibility to go after it. So if you violate your streambed alteration agreement, Sacramento County doesn't come and hassle you with their building inspectors. Fish and Game sends a warden out to get you, or the Corps of Engineers sends their enforcement staff to get you. And that would all be handled on an agency-by-agency basis, just with the agencies that had jurisdiction by law over the action.
So how would you describe this council's role in that process? One word. Oversight, monitoring, passive, active?
Oversight and monitoring, mostly passive. The only active role you would have is should somebody appeal the county's decision that it was a that the covered action was consistent with the Delta plan, and we are not an implementation agency, and not a permitting agency.
Notified. Okay,
Yeah.
very good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, anyone else